over there. We're waiting because nobody had the authority to use the weapons or release a weapon to be used on the enemy unless the president okayed it. So we had to wait for the president to get away. He was at Potsdam at this time period, and we waited, and we were getting some reports because he had a brigadier general out there, Tom Farrell, who had worked for him. Farrell had retired, was with the New York City sewer business, I think it was. But anyway, Farrell came in there and worked to be Grove's alter ego. It worked very nice. Farrell was a very good man, understanding man, and all of that sort of thing. So we had him, the president, to the point that we thought we better get ready and do all of the preliminary stuff that needed to be done to launch the attack as quickly as we could after he said go. And that's exactly the way it took place. We got the word when he was aboard the carrier with Prime Minister Churchill. And I understand from that somebody that was there at that time and furnished the information later that he, Truman, had asked the Prime Minister if we should use the weapon. And I'm told that Mr. Churchill looked at him and he said, Mr. President, it's not whether you should, it's whether you're going to do it now or not. In other words, Churchill saw the thing to it. Truman had fought in World War I, and of course he saw how bloody wars could get. And with this weapon that was predicted to do so much damage and so on and so forth, it was going to kill a lot of people. No question about it. I got pretty warm blood in me. I'm not cold-blooded. And when I started thinking about that, I thought, my God, if I worry about that, I'm not going to be worth a damn job of running this show. I'll be trying to make all kinds of excuses to myself and not do the thing properly. So I thought, well, I'm not going to fight the Germans. I'm not going to fight the Japanese. I'm going to fight the Nazis and the damn samurai. That was the way I took it. And I was bent to do just exactly that thing.
I had already had, I don't know, 6 or 7 missions, and I didn't have a victory yet. I'm a flight leader. I'm supposed to be out there. I'm one of the guys that's supposed to get the kills. And you kind of wonder about yourself, you know, are you cut out for combat or not, you know? So I'm worried about this, and here's my big opportunity. I had chased one and fired the guns, but I'd never gotten one yet. So I get right on him, but it's down low. Enemy 109 can turn pretty good down low. And we're turning across each other, and it's very tight. You know, a fighter pilot can't talk without using his hands. If I had to put my hands back here, I can't tell you the story. But I can't get my lead. You know, we got fixed guns. You got to get the nose up ahead of him and fire. Calculate the lead, just like shooting birds or something like that. So I'm back here pulling a lot of G's and trying, and then he comes around and he has a little bit of a chance at me. Finally, I get around, I think, well, you know what I think I'll do? I'm going to plan B. I'm getting desperate. So next time he comes around, I'm going to line him up, pull my nose way up here. I'll have my belly up to him. I won't be able to see him. And I'll fire a burst out here, and maybe he'd fly through it. Well, I'd been to 3 gunnery schools, and I knew a little bit about shooting, so I thought it was worth a chance. I did this. Next time I come up, I lined him up very nicely. Got him here fired. He comes flying through. He's smoking coolant. He got hit. And man, got pulled up immediately and bailed out. This has a good ending for both parties here. And so I'm kind of sitting there cheering, and I look over on my wing. And here's a Mustang. And it was Johnny England from the other squadron. He was down low. He had his mask off, and he was looking. And he was grinning, and he was going like this. And I thought about it, if I'd got that guy, it was really a lucky shot. I wonder if he shot that thing out from under me, God. Not very sportsmanlike, but, there's a war going on. I guess it's okay,
And we did get to combat at one time, and I'd been on several missions and hadn't accomplished anything, and I kept listening to the old timers that we had with us of what the hell you had to do. And after a while, they always told us, don't try to dogfight a zero. But after not having any success for a while, as a young kid just starting out, I got pretty anxious. And eventually, on a flight, I saw a zero down below me, and I went out after him. And he, I discovered, was much more maneuverable than I, and he'd do a split S underneath me every time I got close to him. But each time he did a split S, I was doing a high side on him, and then I'd come back again, and he'd do another split S, and we worked our way down more. We're right in the middle of the Rabaul Harbor, or Kahili Harbor, and I thought I was doing okay, and I thought eventually he can't split S anymore. He's going to have to give me a decent shot because he can't get under me anymore. He's going to go into the water. What I didn't realize was happening was that he was hollering for help all the way down, and I suddenly discovered myself almost down on the water with a lot of company. I was quickly went from the offense to the defense and started jinking and carrying on trying to survive. And I got my nickname that day, which I'll touch on later. But there was a small cloud not too far away, and I managed to jink my way to it as they took turns taking shots at me. And I did end up with quite a few holes, as you'd expect. Survived, got to the cloud, and as you popped in and out, you felt like you were home free, like squat tag when you were a kid. You were safe in that cloud, and you could make a turn or climb or descend, and you'd pop out, and they didn't know where the hell you were going to pop out, although every time I come out, they were milling around the cloud looking for me to come out.
The day before we arrived there, there'd been a bombing mission. The Japanese had bombed Kunming, and there were hundreds of bodies still laying around on the streets and so forth. And it certainly brought home to you the message that war is a little different than you'd thought it was from reading in the books and so forth. So the next day, Chenault had a great system of, there was no radar or anything in those days, so he had developed a network of having the Chinese stationed wherever he could put them in through the countryside, with a little telegraph key, and anytime they would hear airplanes, they would report back to the headquarters in Kunming how many airplanes and what direction they were flying. And so then at headquarters, they would plot this, and we would know when they were when they got within about 100 kilometers, about 65 miles, we would go up and be waiting for them. Well, that first raid, there were 10 Japanese bombers came in, and they weren't expecting, they didn't have any fighter escort. And of course, when they encountered us, they just panicked is basically what they did. But we only claimed shooting down 4 of them. But later, when they got the records after the war, they found out only one of those 10 bombers had returned. The others had been damaged enough that they didn't get back to their home base.
I flew 223 missions in Korea in P-51s, F-80s, and F-86s. I flew another 157 in Vietnam in the F-4. During that time, I bailed out 3 times, once in the third most shark-infested bay in the world, and the other time into the East China Sea. I hit a truck trying to land a P-51 in restricted visibility when a truck crossed the runway, and I couldn't miss him, hit him, flipped me upside down, gas drafts all over me, and they got me out of there before it caught fire. Those were interesting things, but I want to tell you about the thing that raised my blood pressure more than anything else that ever happened to me.
My first assignment in F-4s, I was backseater, was to Misawa, and the backseaters were all pilots when we got there, so we were half navigators, half pilots. Then the next year I went to Kunsan, and when I arrived there, I remember one of the early missions, we were coming back from the mission landing at Daegu, and the pilot in the final gives me the airplane, says, okay, you got it, come on around. He's talking me around the final turn, which you can do because in the F-4, trying to land from the back seat's not all that easy because you don't have good visibility. So he's talking me around, I'm doing good, and he talks me all the way around, and I land the airplane. Now, I've never landed F-4 before because I was a navigator. Well, he didn't know. He thought I was another backseat pilot. And he
so shaky for a backseat pilot, but a backseat pilot.
So we're rolling down the runway, and he goes, "Oh, that's a little bit of a hard landing, but not okay." And I go something like, "Oh, that was really great. That was my first landing." And there's total silence from the front cockpit. And I mean, all the way down the runway, he's trying to, what? And he finally put it all together, and we didn't say a thing in the debrief. This was not ever to be mentioned again, that he'd given the airplane to a navigator, an F-4 fighter, to land it. So I remember that. I'm sure he remembers it even more than I did.
And it proved out one more time that what the pilots don't know won't hurt them.
And Yamamoto had been arguing that this was all wrong. They had to go east across the Pacific take what was left, entice what was left of the American fleet out of Pearl Harbor and sink it and open up the west coast of America to attack. And he was getting no place in the high consuls of Japan until our little raid. And that convinced the Japanese, and 2 days after our raid, he got the permission to do what he wanted to do. And of course, the rest is history. He assembled the largest fleet they'd ever assembled. He had 4 carriers and battleships and cruisers and troop transports. And he headed across the Pacific 6 weeks after our raid on Tokyo. And the Navy intelligence boys had broken their code and realized they were going to hit Midway first. And so the 2 carriers that took us to Japan and a 3rd carrier, the Yorktown, were sent up to sit about 200, 250 miles north of Midway and wait for them. And of course, the rest is history. Those Navy boys went down, sank all 4 of those Japanese carriers. And incidentally, over 300 of their best trained pilots, men who had flown in the raid on Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier, lost their lives at Midway. It was a terrible defeat for the Japanese from which they never really recovered. So this is why our little pinprick of a raid, the Doolittle Tokyo raid, we now feel that we practically took the first step towards defeating Japan.
Probably for me, the most memorable flight in my training was my first flight in a jet. It was a low level to acrobatics, and I thought I was prepared, knew what I was doing, but and the instructor he was a Marine captain, and he kept saying, "Are you sure you want to turn here? You want to turn?" I said, "Yes, sir." And as I was turning, I was glancing down at my map, and the map indicated I should have been over water, but all I could see was woods and land, and I had a sense I wasn't turning at the right spots. But we kept turning, and I ended up maybe 20 miles off course, and really just a major catastrophe. I got it down, of course, when I came back. And when we went out to do the acrobatic portion, he would demonstrate the maneuver, then he'd have me fly it, and I wasn't doing near as well as I should have been on that either. So when I came back, he asked me, he said, "How do you think you did?" And I said, "I don't think I did too good." He said, "No, you did really bad. I'm going to give you a down. And unless you get yourself squared away, I don't think you belong flying jets." So it was a very embarrassing thing, and I made a commitment to myself. I was never going to put myself in that position again. And so for the rest of the time I ever flew, I, if anything, over-prepared so I wouldn't have to deal with that kind of a situation again. I did run into that fella several years later. He came to Top Gun as a student, and I was an instructor. And he came up to me and said, "Hi, remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, remember me?" And he was actually a good guy, and I thanked him for giving me a kick in the pants when he did, because I needed it.